Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura B Floss Tube. Welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. We're going to be continuing our Let's Make a Snowman Lori Holt sew along. We are on week 3. This week we have a lot of blocks to make, to be quite honest. There are 6 button blocks, the 3 snowman blocks, and the carrot block to do. And those snowman pieces, the snowman shapes are actually pieced and then appliqued. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of sewing and stitching and all kinds of fun this week. But we're going to get through it together, and I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks along the way to hopefully help you out. So without further ado, we're going to head on over to the sewing machine, and we're going to start with those button blocks. Alright, so the first thing we're going to work on are those button blocks, and that is definitely all those little circles that you guys love so much. Hopefully you've been practicing up on some circles. If not, you're going to have 6 chances this week to do so. Actually, more than that, because we have buttons on the snowman too. So you have, 13 chances to work on your circles this week, and then you also have some ovals to work on too. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to swing you on down here so you can see just how I'm going to accomplish all those circles for the buttons. Okay, so I have all my fabric that I cut out for these blocks on my design board. I'm just going to go through here and separate my button prints from my background prints, which would be pretty easy because obviously the backgrounds are bigger and they're all kind of like these little white, the low volume backgrounds. And they're going to go off to the side. Actually, I'm just going to throw them back on the design board, put that off to the side, and then we are going to work on our circles. So if you have not done circles before, I would suggest that you start with just 1 circle and 1 piece of fabric. I wouldn't try to chain piece them together like I'm going to do with this other piece here. And you are just going to adjust your stitch length down. I usually like my stitch length at 1.8, which is pretty tight, but the reason you want it tight on these circles is because you'll get a smoother finish and a smoother edge. Because your stitches aren't as long, so you have less chance to have kind of a wonky, choppy circle that way. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is just lower our presser foot. And actually, let me move you to the other side so you can see a little better because my hand's going to be in the way here. Alright, so what I want you to do, if you haven't seen any of my circle tutorials before, I want you to watch where my hand is at. And I'm going to lower my needle. And that's just going to kind of set it. I'm right there on that line. I'm just going to leave my fingers right here on the side, really close to the presser foot, and we're just going to sew around the circle. Now, as I told you guys before, the smaller the circle, the slower you go. The larger the circle, the faster you can go. And it makes sense because I can't pivot this small piece of fabric as fast as I could a large one. And plus, the curve is a lot tighter on these little circles than on a large circle. So we're just going to go as far as we can, and then we're going to stop and let our presser foot raise and just do a little pivot. And we're going to go again until we feel like we need to do that again. Again, let the presser foot raise and just pivot. Now I am using a Juki DX7. I love this machine. For so many reasons, but it does really not, it's really nice when that presser foot just lifts for me, my needle's down. All of those are settings that you can do, and most modern machines will do that for you. Alright, so there's my first circle. Now we're going to work on the other 5, and I'm just going to let you watch this. I'm going to try to be quiet. Sometimes I forget that I'm supposed to be quiet, but we'll see how it goes. Alright, now you might see that I got off my line here a little bit, so I'm just going to go around again and fix that. Now when I turn that shape out, you'll never even know. Alright, those are my buttons. I'm just going to leave them hanging on the machine for right now, and I'm going to go ahead and get the pieces for my carrot block. And those, I have 1 green piece and 1 orange piece. That makes sense for a carrot, right? And the orange one's definitely a little bigger than it needed to be, but it's alrighty. We can just work with it, put the background off to the side, and then we're going to go ahead and start on the carrot top. Now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and cut my buttons off, put them to the side on the design board with their backgrounds, and then I can go ahead and continue with my carrot. Okay, so we're going to lay out our snowman head block. I have the different fabrics laid out across my design board, and just in my mind I'm keeping a mental note that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I feel like this is a lot of fabric for the piece that we're making, but when it's sewn down and into place, it probably will make sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow the layout in the guide from Riley Blake and just lay these out in order down here, and then we will start sewing them together. Okay, so this is my snowman head block, and all of these pieces need to be sewn together. So I have 6 rows of, 6 rows of 4. So you can do this one of 2 ways. I'm going to do mine in a chain piecing method. So I'm just going to start grabbing the first 2 of these from each of the first 2 columns and start sewing them together in a chain in a row on my machine. And then I will cut it when I get down here and start adding the 3rd column, and then cut it again and add the 4th, and then I'll sew through my rows to complete that entire little block for my snowman face. So let me put you back on the other side and we'll get stitching. Now when I am sewing these together, the 2nd column, I'm putting it on the top face down, because that way when I get to the end and I cut these loose, I can flip them open and add the 3rd column right next to it, and everything will be in order. So that way when I get to, when I have all 4 columns sewn together, I can just leave all the little chains in place and sew together my rows. Alright, so let me show you the design board now. Basically, I have sewn the first 2 columns over here. Now I'm going to cut this off my machine, slide all these little puppies down, just flip this rectangle open, take the 3rd column rectangle and add it right on top. And now everything can stay attached and chained together while I sew down this block. I do the same thing when I'm piecing blocks, and basically we know we are piecing a block here, so it makes sense that we would just go ahead and use the same process to piece this together. Not gonna lie, this is a little cumbersome the way I have it set up right now, but we will get through it. And then I'm gonna sew the 4th column onto this as well, and then we'll start sewing the rows together. What I meant when I said that it was cumbersome, I just mean that it was hard with the design board sewing on the sewing machine, getting the pieces into place and everything. The process of sewing these together is not cumbersome at all. It's just a really, in fact, I think that it's a really easy, efficient way to piece your blocks. Keeps everything together, lined up the way it should be. Now there are some directional prints in this fabric line. I am not worrying about that. If I have words upside down or whatever, I don't care. If you care about that, then you definitely want to keep an eye on it. Alright, so this is the last piece in that fourth column. So at this point, I'm going to cut it off the machine. And we will swing this around, and then we can just flip these 2 rows, right sides together, nest the seams, and start sewing down this first row. Since I sewed the first 2 rows together, I know which way the seam is facing. I want to put those on top so I can purposefully make sure that my next row is nested and the seam is facing the opposite way. That's just going to help my block lay really flat when I go to press it. And I'm just going to continue down the block like that, and then I'll show you how to line up your applique shape. All right, so I have my snowman head block all sewn together and pressed. And I'm going to take the snowman Sew Simple shape, the head, and I'm going to kind of finger press it in half both ways. So I have lines that show me center points for both the up and down and the sides. So once your shape is pressed in half both ways, you can just take those lines and line them up on your seams on that background block. And that is exactly where we're going to stitch it down. Now this can just have a slit cut into it and be turned out just like any other Sew Simple shape. Okay, so let's talk about the snowman middle for a minute. This is a lot of half square triangles. There are 20 half square triangles in the snowman middle, and there are a combination of 10 different fabrics, and it's not always the same 2 fabrics together. So you really need to kind of think through how you're going to break this down. So this is what I'm doing. I have done the first row already. The second row, I am just taking the squares as they're laid out in the row, and I'm leaving them together. So I have a 10 and a 7. And then we have a 9 and a 6. If I can get it off of the... A 3 and an 8. And again, I just laid these out on my sewing machine in the order that they are in the block. A 10 and 2. And then finally a 4 and 1. All right, now this is the second row for the snowman middle block. And at this point, when I get this one sewn together, I'm going to cut it off, and I'm going to lay it over on my design board in the order that it should be going on the block. So when you look at my design board, this is the top left, and this is the top row, and this is the second row in order. I'm going to leave them chain pieced together, and then when I go to cut them, I'm immediately going to put them back in the same line so I can keep track of what goes where. Definitely need to be organized with this block, because otherwise it's going to be a hot mess when we start trying to assemble it.
Okay, so here we are at the cutting table, and what I've done is I've taken each one of the rows and just laid it on the cutting mat in the order that it's laid out in the block, and I'm just trimming these blocks off. Now, You could go ahead and sew another seam and have some smaller half square triangles if you want to. I just chose not to do that. And now I'm just using my Cozy Quilt Designs ruler to determine if my little half square triangles are going to be 2.5 inches or if they're too big. And then any that are too big, I'm just trimming down. Now when I get to the end of this row, I'm just cutting them all apart, keeping them in order, and then stacking them up in that same order, putting it back on the design board, back in the layout for the block, and they will stay that way until we get to the ironing board. So again, this is the last row that I'm doing, just cutting off the excess from those half square triangles, and then I will trim them up and also just stack them back in the same order that they need to be in the block.
All right, so we are at the ironing board and we're getting our iron heated up. On the board are all of our half square triangles in the rows 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're stacked in order. This is important to remember because I'm going to take this first row and I'm going to turn them so I can easily press them open. And I'm going to lay them out in the order they're going to go in the row. Now, the orientation may not be right, but the blocks will be in the right place. We'll have to fix the orientation after we consult the guide. And then I'm going to put these back on the board in the order that they're supposed to be in that row. So these are going to go back here. I'm going to grab the second row and do the same thing. Same thing with the third and the fourth, and then we'll go back to the sewing table to start orientating our blocks the correct way. All right, so I'm just going to be honest here and tell you that I did not lay my block out the exact same way as in the guide. I laid it out and I looked at it and I thought, I want to move this, I want to move that. And so I just started moving some things around and I'm happy with it. So I might play with this one a little bit more. I don't know. I think that it's probably fine the way it is. And now I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the snowman head. I'm going to start just chain piecing these together. I'm going to start with these first 2 columns. I'm going to chain piece all the way across and then sew to my rows together. So yeah, let's get stitching. And I'm just going to be honest and tell you, I'm probably not going to show you all of this because we are just piecing half square triangles together. That's all we're doing. So there's not that much to say about it. And then for the snowman body part, it's the snowman middle of this one. We will just do the same thing as we did for the head and fold that oval in half both ways and then line it up on our seams and go from there for stitching for that applique piece. All right, so that's my first 2 columns. So like I said, I'm just going to cut this off and I'm going to grab the block from the third column and just keep going on and building this block out. Let's talk about the last block that we're making this week, the base of the snowman. This one is a lot to do as well. You really need to be organized with it. I started breaking this down and putting them together, then I thought I should show this because someone may be interested in what I did. So there are basically 6 blocks that you're assembling individually and then putting together for this base of the snowman. And what I did on my design board was just laid all the pieces out. And then I just took the first 2 pieces from each block that I could sew together and started assembling each individual block. So once I get this block together, or once I get all of the individual blocks together, then I'll sew the rows together. So what I did for the first 6 blocks is I took the middle and the top, the middle and the left, middle and the top. Same thing down here. On my second round through, I'll take this section that I have sewn together and I'll add the other piece that I can, which is the bottom of the first block, the right side of the second, and so on all the way through. When I get all the way through with that round, I'll cut them off the machine, put them back on the design board where they belong, and I'll start building again with the left hand, the top, the left, the top, the left, the top. All right, so that'll probably make more sense once I start doing it. So this is the first block. I have the top already assembled onto or sewn onto it. So on the bottom, I grab the second block and the right hand side because that's what I can sew together. And then the bottom of the third. And if you're looking at the cutting guide, you can, like, you know, it'll make more sense to you. You see it in the cutting guide as well, more than just watching me do this. But I just thought if you look in the cutting guide and you would possibly be overwhelmed by what you were facing, just seeing how I laid this out and accomplished these little blocks may be helpful. So that's what we're doing right now. All right, so this is the last piece for the second round. So again, I'm going to take these and I'm going to cut them off the machine, and I'm stacking them back in order. So block 1 is on top, and I'll put those back up here. And just, you know, consult the guide to make sure you have all the pieces going the right way, if that matters to you. If you don't care about that, then don't worry about it. And honestly, it is totally up to you whether or not you are going to really be concerned about that. All right, so, and then that goes here. So now I have them this far. I have 2 pieces onto each of the middles. So now I'm going to take the left-hand side of the first one, and then I'll take the top of the second one, and so on. It doesn't really matter which way I take this through the machine, because I'm going to cut all of them off before I start sewing the last block, or the last piece for each of these little blocks. I am just finger pressing my seams at this point. I'm not taking them to an ironing board or anything. I'm just doing a finger press and making sure that the seams are kind of just go in the direction that I want them to underneath. I gotta admit, when the sew-along was happening on Lori's vlog, I wasn't really paying attention very closely. I was really kind of busy with class, and I just wasn't paying attention like how involved some of these pieces are. So when I pulled out my stuff today to start working on these blocks, I was like, oh my. So I'll have to go back and read some of the comments on a couple of the Facebook groups that I'm in to see if anyone was freaking out over these blocks, or just, you know, at least mentioning, hey, there's a lot of work in this. All right, so now we have the final piece for each one of these little bitty blocks to put on. Tell me in the comments below if you've made these blocks already, how you did with it, and if you have any tips to share. Do you have your border blocks done? I would like to know that too. I did finish up my border blocks. It's been in a couple weeks, I guess, when they were finally finished. I'm just going to start sewing some blocks now the little blocks to get sewn together. All right, so this is the first and second block of the first row. And then I'm going to grab the first and second block of the bottom row, get them oriented the correct way. And again, I'm just finger pressing this. I will take it to the ironing board and give it a really good press before I applique the oval onto it. I have the cutting guide sitting right here behind my machine so I can quickly reference, match, and figure out where the fabrics came from. I am using a kit for this quilt. I don't remember if I mentioned that earlier on or not, but I do have a kit for this, so all of the fabrics that I'm using will match in the guide. And now I'm just going to sew these 2 rows together, and then we'll give it a really good press. Okay, I'm honestly just going to eyeball this, and then I will sew it down. So I'm sewing the interfacing to the block that we just built, and this is for the snowman base. Okay gang, so I have a lot of shapes to be turning out here before we can start appliquing our blocks and assembling part of our quilt. So I am going to work on turning my shapes, and I'll share any tips for shapes that we haven't had before, or just a different way that I do that, and then we will start appliquing our blocks. So the one shape this week that I want to kind of give you some tips on is that carrot. Whew, that long skinny carrot is kind of a trick to turn out. Now, you know, if you've watched my other videos, sometimes I do some of my turning a little differently, and I am going to be doing this differently this week. So I'm using the Turn It All tool, which I've shown you before. There's a link in the description box below. I'm just going to insert my medium Turn It All tool, which is the blue piece of PVC, and this dowel rod. And then I'm just going to push from the fabric side and work this carrot down the stick. All right, so there is the majority of the carrot is turned out at that point. Now to get that point turned out, I'm going to take my stiletto and just kind of dig in there and pull this out to a nice point. Again, hopefully you can see that. I'm just taking the stiletto into the point of the carrot and just digging that out. And I'll continue working on that until I have it to the little point that I want. And you're not going to be able to get all of that fabric turned out. You're just not, because it's just too narrow there at the tip of the carrot. So just get it to the point where you're happy with it and call it good. Now for the other end where I cut that slit in the back before I insert the Turn It All tool, I'll just take my thumb and flip that out. Now obviously I will still take my 2-point turner and then run it along those seams. And then down to the point as far as I can go. You can't get all the way to the point just because it is such a nice, since it is like a really tight little carrot point. But there's my turned out carrot, and it didn't take too much effort on my part to get that done. So this is for the snowman head. I have all my shapes turned out, so we're going to start laying the blocks out and doing some applique. All right, so I have all my little shapes appliqued, and they're all on their backgrounds, and they're happy little things. I did go ahead and I sewed the 6 buttons together. Now I'm not going to do any of that middle stitching yet. I'm going to do that after I quilt the quilt. I'm going to be using some embroidery floss to make those little button centers that you're seeing in the cutting guide. But the big news this week is that we can put that top row together. I'm so super excited about that. So I've grabbed all my blocks off the design board for that first row, and we're going to start laying it out and sewing it all together. So the first thing, now remember that we have been sewing a few things together as we could, but the first thing I need to do is take my little hat and sew it to my little buttons. So that's what we're going to do first, and then we're going to sew on the branch and poinsettia, and then that will get sewn to the snowman word, and then all of that will get sewn to the bucket, and we'll have our first row together. So let's just sew these things up. Now it's time to sew our snowman onto that top little segment. And I'm just gonna leave my snowman word on top just because I want to make sure it lines up really well. Okay, let's give it a press, put it on the design board, and have a reveal. All All right, there we have it. Week 3 is done. We have those buttons and the snowman pieces and that carrot are all completed and ready for us. So we don't have much done for this next little section on any of the other sections, but we do have the first row together. Now you're gonna notice that yes, my buttons are not in there correctly. There is an issue with the cutting guide. Those buttons are supposed to be squared down to 2.5 inches, not 3.5 inches. So when I started to assemble that segment, it is, yeah, there were some issues, but I resolved it. My buttons aren't exactly centered, but that's okay. I'm fine with it because this is, you know, a handmade, kind of a folk arty type feel quilt. So I am perfectly fine with it. But before you do yours, make sure you update your cutting guide to show that those buttons are supposed to be squared to 2.5, not 3.5. And that way you can make sure that they are centered on your blocks. And then maybe pay attention when you're sewing it together so they're not flipped upside down. But it's fine. So this is row 1. It is completed and we are all well on our way to making our snowman quilt. All of my border blocks are completed and they're up here on the design wall behind me. I'm very excited that all that piecing is behind me. There was a lot of piecing this week, you guys, for those snowman pieces. So good luck with that, and I hope that you can keep yourself straight in that way, or just resolve yourself to the fact that yours is going to be unique and you can put it together however you want, which is usually the way I go with things, but this is just what we do. Next week, let's see. Next week is week 4. We'll be working on those winter hats, the sled, and the pipe. So we'll get a great big block done for that next section on our quilt, and that's going to be super fun. I absolutely love those red sleds, so this is going to be a favorite block of mine, I'm sure. Hey, leave me a comment down below and let me know if there were any tips I shared this week that really helped you. If there's something that I didn't show that you would like to see in an upcoming video, share that as well. I do respond to all comments that I receive within 24 to 48 hours, and I love to hear from you guys, so please feel free to reach out. Until next time, I hope you're finding joy in all you do. Make sure you carve out some time for crafting and creating, and make sure it's always happy stitching.